The commission will come to order. We'll begin with introductions. My name is Nick Neptune. I currently serve as the chair of the City of Raleigh Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Commission. We'll proceed with our vice chair.
Joe Caruso. I am the vice chair and chair of the policy committee.
I'm Brian Thomas. I'm on the Outreach and Engagement Committee.
I'm Elizabeth Alley. I'm on the Policy Committee.
Mary Jo Gallenbeck, Planning Committee.
Pierre Tong, Planning Committee.
Celeste Bravo Taylor, Planning Committee.
Thank you, everyone. As I understand it, we are not quite at quorum. We are one shy of quorum for the commission meeting this evening. So what I'd like for us to do, out of respect and consideration for everyone's time, especially members of our public who might be here to make public comment, we are going to set aside the approval of the minutes, which requires quorum, and we're going to proceed directly into public comment. I'd like to first begin with a very special guest of the commission. We have our very own council member, Jane Harrison for District D, who also happens to serve as our council liaison to the commission. She has an update to share, very brief, on our efforts to create a hybrid option for not only our commission, but for many boards and commissions with the city. Council member Jane Harrison.
Yeah. Hey, good evening, everyone. So good to see you. I just wanted to let you know that tomorrow at our council meeting, we will be talking about which boards and commissions can meet virtually, hybrid, whereabout around town. I know there was a request from this group that we could have a hybrid opportunity, so I have been bringing that to the attention of staff. And so we will have that information tomorrow about what we can do to proceed. We're also going to need to look at staff resources that might need to be part of any new kind of technology opportunities. But I will continue to advocate for having that option, particularly for BPAC. So we'll hopefully move forward tomorrow.
Councilmember Harrison, I just on behalf of the commission would like to thank you for your work and your leadership on that effort. I know that it's been top of mind, a priority for this commission as it relates to expanding access, right, and opportunities for folks to participate rather than limiting them or restricting them. So just, again, deeply appreciate your work on that front. Any further comment from members of the commission?
Thank you.
Yeah.
To illustrate our point, last month we had a talk about Vision Zero and the impact that our roads have on our community and on losing lives, on being injured, barriers to access, and our commission member who has been, I would say, argue the most directly negatively impacted by our unsafe streets is unable to attend because he's requested the virtual option that has not been made available. So I think we're all of us, our conversation was really lacking because of his absence. So just to drive that point home. And also, I would imagine that this conversation is about whether or not there's votes, about whether or not we're quasi-judicial, and wondering, you know, if there are ways that we could have some meetings where perhaps we don't vote, we don't, we act as if we weren't at quorum, like if there's creative options there instead of just a yes or a no. Yeah, that's a great point. That's something I can bring up tomorrow. Yeah, y'all are not quasi-judicial, so I think you're going to have more flexibility than other groups. That sounds great. Yeah. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. Yeah, and I've just got one more item. Just want to say thank you to everyone who was able to come out for our District D bicycle ride. We had a ton of fun on Saturday morning. Folks got to try out the new Cardinal bikes. Well, new to them. It was actually new to me. I had never been on one of those. As someone who, regularly uses my own bicycle, I never think to use these fleets that are around town. So it was really fun to see how easy they are to use and just to get outside with a lot of folks around the district. So again, thanks for anyone who was able to help make that happen.
Thank you, Councilmember Jane Harrison. Really appreciate you and your leadership. We will proceed with further public comment. As a reminder, please, for those of you who are here to make comment, keep your comments limited to 3 minutes per speaker. This is a standard practice, if I'm not mistaken, both with City Council and many of our boards and commissions, but would certainly like to invite, if we have additional members of our public here to make public comment, now would be a good time. We'd love to see you, love to hear you. Anybody? I see lots of people being very kind and generous and encouraging each other to make comment. And if you'll introduce yourself, your name, your address, and then your comment.
Hi, my name's Sean Blankard. I live at 1904 Trexler Court off Kaplan. And the Kaplan's probably not the best place to have a bike lane. I'm a biker myself. I ride a fixed gear road bike, and I also train for triathletes. But that road is so dangerous, and it used to be used for parking, and we really have no place to park around that area. And they've converted it into a bike. There's a bike lane there. It's very dangerous. And there's this hill that goes down by Kentwood Park, and riding down that hill, there's just no way of stopping before the cars come out. And I've almost hit a couple cars. I ride my bike on there. It's just not a very good place to have a lane. So I think it'd be better if we used it for back to what it was before parking. So that's just anyway. But thank you very much. The Neuse River Trails are fantastic. It's beautiful out here. All the greenway. It's the best rides I've ever had in my life. But thank you for everything you do.
Well, and thank you for taking time this evening to share with us your lived experience there along Trexler Court, Kaplan Drive. Just to briefly respond to that, I know that members of the commission, members of our city transportation staff, and our own, again, council member Jane Harrison, along with the director for transportation and current assistant city manager Michael Moore, I think Paul Callum. There was a number of us able to make our way out to do a site visit along Kaplan Drive, Trexler Court, and I believe that tonight we'll be hearing an update from staff on some new approaches at modifying that corridor to restore some parking while maintaining some facilities, sort of just out of consideration for what we've heard and what we've seen in real time. I think prior to visiting the site, at least I'll speak for myself personally, I wasn't as familiar with the setup of the townhomes and that corridor where there truly was a lack of just parking. Whether it's friends, movers, exactly. The bottom line is I deeply appreciated, I think, Ms. Aerosmith coming out previously to share the sort of diminished kind of quality of life that's resulted in what was a well-intentioned effort, guided by years of work and practice and, et cetera. Mm-hmm. But, it means a lot to me to have, members of our public come through and share with us in real time, well, hey, we tried to do this, here's the actual result of it, and here's how we could likely do better. And so I know we'll be hearing an update from city staff later this evening on the Kaplan Drive front, and looking forward to sharing that with all of you. So thank you. Any further comments from the commission? Okay, thank you. Further public comment?
What I did, because I had several times when I've been here, I have asked what kind of studies, impact studies and safety studies had been done, and I never got an answer. So I've done some research. What I did tonight for you guys to pass around, I got everybody a copy, but it's just some articles, one from WRAL, one from Forbes magazine, and one from just about how, in fact, dangerous and why it's dangerous, as Sean pointed out. By giving basically doesn't make anybody safer, but does give a false sense of security, which of course makes it more dangerous, not less. But anyway, so here's these.
Did these seem to come through you first, or does it?
Thank you.
But what I would also like to know is, I know the first time I was here, and I have. Finally, what I did was email, I think it was you, so that you guys would be able to email me back. So I finally did get emails, but I have given my telephone number. I've gotten no calls, because what I would also like is to be able to sit down, or at the very least have myself and perhaps myself and Sean or a couple of other people from the neighborhood actually be there when you guys are looking around, because I'm not quite. I appreciate that you did it, but I'm not quite sure how much could have happened when you didn't have anybody from the neighborhood who lived there to actually talk to about it. So I would like to see that happen. I know, Nick, you work nights, and I work days. However, Sean works days. However, I'm available all day Monday, so I'm available in the day on Monday. And I'm guessing your restaurant is closed on Monday. I could be wrong about that. But it would be nice to actually have people meeting with us, the people who live there, so that we can talk to you about it.
Thank you, Ms. Aerosmith. And as these documents are being passed down, I will just briefly, number one, again, thank you for your time, your energy. You've been very consistent in coming through and sharing with us again what really amounts to me as a honestly felt diminished quality of life in your neighborhood along Trexler Court, Kaplan Drive. And I look forward to hearing from city staff tonight the various sort of new approaches at a high level that we might be able to take on to sort of remedy some of those concerns. And perhaps what we can do, in addition to hearing this evening in real time those new approaches, we can set up for ourselves on a Monday, because I do, as it happens, work during the day on behalf of our parks and greenways. No longer am currently involved in our food and beverage industry, but in fact work full-time for the Dix Park in District D on behalf of the Conservancy team, the nonprofit team to the city. But to put it briefly, I would love to organize a day, maybe a Monday afternoon between 2 and 4 o'clock if possible, for a follow-up sort of site visit where we could take a look at, again, some of these new approaches that we're going to review tonight here in the council chambers. Perhaps we could have a follow-up outreach and engagement opportunity on a Monday, and we can call and coordinate with Ms. Aerosmith to make sure she and others who might be interested are able to join us. So, with that being said, I would like to proceed with further public comment. Thank you, Commissioner Bravo Taylor. Do we have any further members? Oh, I see. She looks so familiar to me. I feel like I recognize her. But you know what? Could you share, Madam, your name
Yes.
and your address and your public comment? 3 minutes,
Absolutely.
please.
Thank you very much, Nick. My name is Joan Lyons. I work at 223 Southwest Street, but I am a bike commuter from Cary to Raleigh pretty regularly. Not today, though. Unfortunately, I'm going to a conference tomorrow, so I have to be quick with my comment. But I am here today as a Oaks and Spokes board member to speak on behalf of the organization about something that we received actually from a board member who is unable to attend tonight because he's also a consultant like I am. I work at Stewart. We're a multidisciplinary planning and engineering firm that does lots of different work for bike and pedestrian things in the community throughout North Carolina and South Carolina. But I will read the email from Tyler Farrell, who works at Kimley Horn. Have we thought about engaging the city about swapping the bike lanes and on-street parking on Hillsborough Street between West Street and the Capitol building? I think Fontaine had brought this up with us while she was still at the city, and it's something that we could promote because it was low-hanging fruit. I bring this up because I was doored on this stretch coming back to work on Friday afternoon, and thankfully someone wasn't driving in the lane next to me, so I only had to make some cuts and scrapes from the pavement. It seems like the lanes would have been restriped to get some protected bike lanes here on one side that's more heavily utilized in the city. And he provides a picture of some of his different sketches. I've reached out to some people at the city about this, but I think having Oaks and Spokes as another voice of support could be impactful. Thanks, Tyler. So I'm here to kind of talk about that with you all. Happy to have a conversation moving forward about it. We had previously had an advocacy meeting last year around this time where we discussed some improvements in that segment of street. So just really looking forward to having the discussion with you all, and thank you for the time.
Thank you. And could you just briefly repeat that stretch of Hillsborough that you're specifically
Correct.
interested in?
I believe that was from West Street to where the Capitol building is.
The Capitol building is. Okay.
Correct.
Thank you. Salisbury. That is correct. It's Salisbury. And again, the suggestion was to maybe switch
potentially, but I think really the intent of today's conversation, because we have discussed as a board, is that we're not coming to you all with design recommendations at this time. We have multiple different various different consultants that work on design like myself. And so I think that it's probably best that we just leave it open to interpretation, and then, we work with the community on what that looks like moving forward.
Agreed, 1,000%. And if I'm not mistaken, Hillsborough Street, the corridor, is in fact on tonight's agenda. So, but not this specific segment. But I wonder if staff could, offer an initial thought on this segment of the corridor.
Yes. So we will be focusing on phase 1 of Hillsborough Street between Gardner Road and Oberlin Road, but we'll have some additional conversation around Hillsborough Street holistically that could address this topic.
Thank you, Ms. Godwin.
And I unfortunately won't be able to stay for that section of the meeting because I do have things going on with my life. But I have business cards. Please reach out if you guys need anything at all. I'll let you guys pass it around.
Will do. Thank you. And just for the public record, this is all being recorded and I believe available on YouTube for future reference if there's interest in watching the commission
Wonderful.
meeting
I can't
later
wait to
on.
watch myself back. Love it.
So fun.
And also shout out to Jane. Really great event on Saturday. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Any comment from the commission?
Actually, yes.
Oh,
Thank you for the
Commissioner
opportunity.
Gellenbeck, yes.
No, you're welcome to go. I just want to confirm my personal experience riding in that cycle lane on Hillsborough Street between West and the Capitol. And we've addressed that it's the door zone and that I almost was injured because of a driver opening their door as I was approaching their space. Not because of their malice, but because of just it's a standard habit of just opening your door. I think if we do switch the locations is a great solution, and I hope that moves forward quickly. So thank you for bringing it to our attention.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Commissioner Gellenbeck. Any further comment from the commission? I believe we have a former associate with Stewart. Is that right, Miss Commissioner Alley? Just acknowledging.
Interesting. Okay.
Right. I'm like, yeah, we know something about this, right?
All in the family.
Yeah,
You'll love
yeah,
to see
yeah.
it. Well, with that being said, thank you again.
Of
Thank
course.
you. Thank you. Deeply appreciate
Yes,
your time.
please reach out if you guys have any questions or if you'd like to meet. I love coffee meetings. So
Love it. Big fan. Any further comment from our public? Hearing none, we shall proceed with our presentations for the evening. First up, Kaplan Drive, an update on Kaplan Drive.
Good evening, everyone. Just bear with me for a moment while I pull up our slides. All right. Well, good evening. I'm Barbara Godwin with our Transportation Department, for those that might not know me. Tonight, we're going to be reviewing Kaplan Drive, talk a little bit about some background on the corridor and the existing conditions today. So Kaplan Drive was programmed into the annual resurfacing list, the section between Gorman Street and Kent Road, initially back in 2019. So every year when we get a list of streets to be resurfaced, we overlay that list with our bike plan. And so from that overlaying, we matched the bike plan to Kaplan Drive, which was designated to receive conventional bike lanes on the corridor. So just a little bit of background about this road. This corridor is connecting into Gorman Street, which kind of further connects into the university campus at NC State. So talking a little bit about the outreach and implementation background, back in February of 2019, stakeholders on the corridor were first notified of this project and encouraged to look into our materials online, at the pavement marking plans, as well as reach out to staff with questions. An open house was also held that month, and an online survey was available to submit feedback through March of 2019. BPAC reviewed this project later that year, and then in June of 2020, this project was adopted with the rest of the resurfacing projects between 2019 and 2020. So this project was installed and no parking was implemented in a traffic schedule change in January of 2021. So this image just gives you an idea about the existing conditions out there today. You can see a northbound and a southbound bike lane located on either side of the street, signed 30-mile-per-hour speed, and then no parking on both sides. So in talking about further engaging this corridor, it's important to understand this existing condition. Apologies for the slight block from the menu on this cross-section. That was not intentional. But this cross-section displays the existing condition as something for consideration in terms of understanding what the community has felt that this cross-section, as it is today, has impacted them. And so really any further engagement along this corridor, we would want to get feedback on how the community feels about this existing condition. So our kind of hybrid option proposes keeping a bike lane on the northbound section of this road. As you can see in this snapshot, we are able to squeeze in a parking protected bike lane on that northbound side. This is the side of the road that goes uphill, which would essentially serve as a climbing lane for that bike traffic, and adds parking back on this side of the street as a buffered bike facility. This would furthermore move the southbound traffic into a shared space with the car vehicles.
Barbara, before you move on, can you, which traffic flow is climbing up?
On the right.
On the right side.
The right-hand side?
Yes.
Okay, so that is the bike lane?
That's a climbing lane.
Parking, and then the travel lanes?
Yes, and apologies, that menu kind of
No, it's
blocks
okay.
that.
Making sure I understand.
Yeah, no problem.
Yeah, this would be looking west or north, depending on what section you're on, just to orient yourself.
So really, as we talk about engaging the neighborhood, I wanted to give you a visual for the boundary of this project, which is that blue line there between Gorman Street and Kent Road. The yellow area that you see is the area that we would target for engagement moving forward. So it really extends back a couple of blocks and also feeds into streets that Kaplan Drive is the only outlet for those neighborhoods. So just wanted to point that out. And then additionally, the goal of our further engagement would be to get feedback on the project now that it's been on the ground for a couple of years. And as I spoke to earlier, just really understand how the community has utilized this corridor and really, you know, what we should take a look at as we continue to talk about Kaplan. So tonight we are recommending to send this item to Planning Committee for further review in April, because we already have items slated for March committee. And then additionally, staff will proceed with engagement efforts in the neighborhood. And that concludes my presentation for Kaplan.
Ms. Godwin, thank you for the presentation. Just a couple quick follow-up items. So number one, it sounds like we'd like to send this to Planning Committee, which I believe is Commissioner Tong's committee. Commissioner Tong, are you comfortable taking this on in April?
Yes, we can look at this in April.
Thank you. Number two, I just want to reaffirm the interest of the Outreach and Engagement Subcommittee in scheduling a date for a Monday. So, you know, typically we meet on Thursdays, I think the second Thursday of the month, but I'd like to reschedule that for a Monday next month, where we can get out and ideally maybe coordinate with Ms. Aerosmith and other folks along the corridor. So just as long as that's on the record, then I'm certainly happy to proceed with these recommendations. Any further comment, thought from the commission?
My familiarity with Kaplan predates the bike lanes to when it was one of our very early traffic calming projects. And that hill is quite steep. And so I think the idea of a climbing lane is a good one. And I wonder, I'm imagining that some of the traffic calming interventions were perhaps not as effective as they could have been, and wondering if this is an opportunity, without completely opening everything back up, to think about perhaps speed cushions to reduce the speed differential between the bikes coming down the hill and the cars coming down the hill, because it's very difficult to go the speed limit on a hill that fast,
Yeah.
that's that steep.
If I could just briefly, if I'm not mistaken, the bike ride that Oaks and Spokes and Councilmember Harrison enjoyed this Saturday included a little. We didn't make it all the way there. Okay, but because as I understand, I had to peel off because I had another meeting, so my apologies. But I understand that we have some new traffic, like circles.
Yes.
Circles. Could somebody speak to that? Maybe Ms. Godwin, could you, or could? Because I understand like there are these new traffic circles along Kaplan, like traffic calming measures on the other side.
Yeah, so on
And this is Mr. Callum for the record.
So Paul Callum here, one of the assistant transportation directors here. So Kaplan was an earlier traffic calming project. So we've got raised medians through there. We've got bump outs. We've got some raised tabletops. I will say some of that we have found in the past, because it's early on, hasn't been as effective as what we would like to see. So what I would just say is we may want to keep these items separate so one doesn't hang the other one up. So that would just be my recommendation, is we can go back and look at the section west of Kent, because that was basically our traffic calm. That's where it started. And then we can look at this, what we're speaking to tonight, as far as a separate conversation. So again, happy to look at that, but I would just recommend maybe keeping them separate there.
Yeah, I think my intent is, thinking it as a not super comfortable rider in mixed traffic, that I'm not sure I would feel great going down that hill in a Shero with vehicular traffic. And also, I completely appreciate the need to restore some on-street parking there. So if there is a way that we could make this alternative kind of more appealing, because I do think, Sheros are not best practice anymore. But that said, there's sometimes when you need to use them. And so maybe there's some other interventions we could make for that mixed traffic situation to make it safer.
I have a brief follow, but I think Commissioner Tong wanted to make a comment.
Just to be clear, what are the proposed limits of this change for Kaplan?
It would be between Kent Road and Gorman, the original project.
And if I'm not mistaken, the downhill portion is actually next to a sidewalk facility. And, I just wonder if it's worth acknowledging that for a cyclist who perhaps doesn't feel comfortable, which honestly,
If it's in good condition, I would probably take the sidewalk there, as long as there's not root upheavals. But
Yeah. Just acknowledging that sort of the current lay of the land there. But I appreciate the observations, and I also appreciate.
So let me just make sure I understand, Commissioner. So you want us to look at the section from Kent back to Gorman with your comments then?
I was thinking of wherever we were talking about removing a bike lane,
Yep.
and we're going to have a Shero on steep slopes.
Yeah.
We're going to have a climbing lane, but the downhill side, it's quite difficult for
Okay.
cars to go the speed limit
All right,
there.
so let's maybe look at that, because I want to make sure I was understanding her correctly. So, because I was thinking about the
I think
section.
I have my limits.
That's right, east of
backwards.
that, because we got another traffic calming project that we put down on the ground several years ago.
Gotcha.
So,
This one is like 10 plus years old, down by the park.
so
Yeah.
let us take this back and look at this holistically on this section then.
Thank you. And I really appreciate, again, Planning Commission taking this on as well to do a further deep dive. And I do look forward to getting out on site with the community on a Monday to just, again, see it in real time, with folks from the neighborhood. But other than that, Ms. Godwin, Mr. Caruso?
Yeah, I would just like to offer a idea or suggestion. I think one thing I would like to see is maybe due to how kind of tight the space is, I don't know that we could do flexi posts, but like if we could on the side where there's going to be parking returned, if we could like put down in kind of the paint strip like the armadillos or something, where multi-purpose to prevent drivers from parking in the lane and also to keep drivers off the curb so that it kind of ends up turning into a traffic calming device and kind of narrowing that width so that delivery drivers don't go up on the curb and wherever. Like I said, I think a flexi post is probably it's going to be right in people's doors, so they can't open the door. But
the
But if we
armadillos.
could do the dillos or something like that, curb, and we can keep them out of the bike lane.
Well, and just as a brief follow, I think what I appreciate about that suggestion is that it could also be a deterrent to, let's say, delivery vehicles
Right.
who oftentimes have no regard for bike lanes, and the armadillos could be just something worth
Right.
considering.
Yeah, just help to define where the parking spots are.
Yeah.
We can take a look at that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Caruso. Thank you, Ms. Godwin. And Ms. Clark, yes, please. Ooh, Mr. Caruso. Thank you, Ms. Clark.
That is a good question. They are little, I think, plastic, little things that get stuck into the ground.
Like a little hump.
Little hump, basically.
If you can imagine, like the back of the armadillo.
Like a turtle shell almost on the ground.
Yeah.
If you go on to Old Wake Forest at Glasscock, there are some installed relatively recently.
You can think of it in a parking lot when they have a small curb that prevents you from rolling past. It's very similar to that, but it does have an arch to it. They're black and white, so they've got the nickname armadillo.
You could mount it in an emergency vehicle.
So it's low, but it does kind of deter you from rolling into
Yeah,
that
I mean,
space.
like if you drive at a reasonable speed, you can go over them. But if you're kind of just trying to park, it will basically prevent you from driving over them.
Much like in the parking lot with those kind of bumpers. Great question. Thank you, Ms. Clark. And
Yes.
further comment, Ms. Sullivan?
Yes, please. Thank you. I do want to support Commissioner Alley's comment about the sharrows, and I can feel my resistance in wanting to cycle in that lane. And so that tells me that we're not meeting the safety and comfort level of the majority. If I am not comfortable. So I think that's really important. Thank you for identifying that. The other thing that I wanted to ask about was that since we have removed parking, if that's my understanding, is there issues because the parking has been removed that we're aware of, that's been reported
So I
in
think
that section?
I think the short answer is yes. And in fact, I believe so Ms. Aerosmith was able to join us maybe a couple months back, and I believe that, yeah.
So the parking was removed in 2020, so it's been 2 years.
It took effect in 2021,
21,
early
yeah.
2021.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So a year and a half ago.
Yeah.
All right. And so people are parking in the bike lanes now? No?
No.
Delivery trucks, are they parking in the bike lanes now? And so how far away from where you find parking, how far is that from your homestead?
Well, so if I may offer just briefly, because I've had a chance to visit the location,
Yeah.
it's like a townhome community where each home has like 2 dedicated spots, 1 or 2.
Okay.
But other than that, there's actually virtually no other option for parking. I
Parking?
mean, even when we were making the site visit, I think one of us had to park illegally, to be quite honest, And so I think my point is it was eye-opening to be on site in the neighborhood and to see the extraordinary lack of available kind of public parking in, again, this sort of neighborhood context. I mean, it was really striking.
Okay.
And so I appreciate, the time that city staff has taken to try to identify, a remedy. So, for instance, we'll use Ms. Aerosmith as an example, who joined us in January and February, and she shared how there were occasions where she was trying to have people over to assist her with, various engagements with her home, and they technically had to park illegally to try to support
Right.
her. But I have to imagine, given that it's a large community, she's not the only one enduring that dynamic.
Right. And I do appreciate, I feel the empathy of that challenge of not having the parking, but we really have to take a hard look. Statistically, for every vehicle in the United States, there are 7 parking spots for it. So we have a lot of land that is reserved for parking. And I'm just going to expand on this conversation. Ultimately, if we want to reduce our car dependency, then we do need to go back to some of the alternatives that we used, which is promoting, like shared rides. Carpooling is one, but also reserving some of that public land space so that we create the infrastructure that enables people to have options, right? And so if we are restoring it back to a condition that wasn't inducing ridership, then I don't find that to be forward motion in this era of change that we desperately need because our population is growing. And I also don't know whether Kaplan is our best road. I remember when I first came on, we were addressing some of the, which Paul Black was addressing it, the existing bike lanes. And one of them I'm really familiar with. It's in my area. And I would never cycle on this road because of the terrain. It's not physically comfortable. I can do it now because I have an e-bike. But prior to that, so I'm like, why are we putting a cycle lane on this particular road? And so that leads me to wonder, is Kaplan the designated road that will best serve that area for that mode of transportation? And I don't know, though, because it's not my space. I'd have to do a deep dive. Thank you.
Well, and I just, briefly would like to express appreciation for the comment because I think it captures the two dynamics that we're trying to test, measure, and balance in real time as we continue to grow and as we continue to try to design for the environment that we want to see that actually encourages and induces the type of travel and transit that we like to see. I think to put it again briefly, you had this application of a facility that, here we are years later realizing in real time that, maybe this wasn't the best, approach in the application of this particular bike facility in this particular neighborhood context. Now, look, best practices, they evolve over time, and we're trying to, again, strike that balance and keeping up while making adjustments in real time. But I think this is a really good example and case study of a dynamic where, between city staff and the engineers and the transportation professionals in conversation with the community, we're trying to do all of this. And frankly, at the end of the day, it has resulted in, again, what I would just sort of term a diminished quality of life for an entire neighborhood. And honestly, I didn't fully appreciate it until I saw it with my own eyes on site with other colleagues from city staff, with Councilmember Jane Harrison, seeing it on site in real time, how in that particular townhome neighborhood context, which, is like all ages, it's all backgrounds, are living and trying to exist over there. And so I just appreciate, again, the time and the energy on behalf of staff to revisit the corridor. And again, to sort of your greater point, as far as like maybe this isn't even an appropriate space for a facility.
I really don't know the infrastructure, but I do know that if we, Ms. Harrison.
That's your point, Mary Jo. It is an area I avoid biking because of the hill. So I'm in this area all the time. I go to Gorman or I go around Bedford.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And she's a very good bicyclist. And so if you're not meeting the comfort level for the confident bike rider, then we're missing the mark completely.
Yeah, agreed.
But I also want to just stress that once we get the infrastructure where we're meeting the majority of the public, the dependency on owning a vehicle will die.
Mm-hmm.
And so all of a sudden, we could potentially be having one-car households because the bicycle has become a viable mode of transportation. And therefore, the spaces will completely transform.
And just briefly, before we get to Miss Alley, I just want to acknowledge how I agree with that 1,000%. I do think something that we're often having to reaffirm with ourselves in this work is that, we are living and working and building in a context of hundreds of thousands of people sharing space, whether it's residential or commercial. And it's a context where we're having to, not only reaffirm that truth, but exert ourselves with extraordinary patience from time to time as we try to build and grow together. Miss Alley?
So two thoughts looking at this for kind of our future planning endeavors. Number one is I think this underscores why we need interconnected streets and not necessarily a rigid grid, but not a dendritic road network, because all of that yellow feeds onto Kaplan, right? And so there might be other ways out, but we need to be able to have different roads that are safer choices, that puts less car pressure on this one street, and it might be able to let you pick. My second point, to think about topography in our planning. You know, as a planner, I'm guilty of this as well. You know, you look at that line, and that line's like every other line, but when you actually listen to the experience of the people that live there and use the cycle there, you would know that perhaps that might not be the best choice. Now, that might have been considered in choosing this in our long-range planning, because there wasn't a connected road network, and so you had to deal with the road that was there. So it's come up several times in our talking about development projects that have wanted to exempt out of or condition out of multiple points of egress because of a concern about traffic. And while that concern about traffic is valid, it makes it so that you're dependent on the one road instead of multiple points of access for people that aren't in cars. So that's my planning soapbox for the night.
Thank
Hopefully my
you.
last
Well,
one.
I just again want to thank Ms. Alley, Ms. Gallenbeck, really everyone who's participated. And in addition to our public, I think that's the point of the commission. This is the point of the board. We're trying to create a space where we're engaged in conversation with each other, and we're sharing with one another our experiences, our perspectives, right, as we continue to try to build, a city, a community together. So again, just briefly, deeply grateful for the comments, the observations made tonight. Ms. Godwin, I believe you are done with the Kaplan Drive presentation. I think that we have one more presentation. I know that our last commission meeting went for about 3 hours or so, really trying to keep us on track tonight. It was fun. It was fun. I have a lot of good memories, but I'm very excited to hear about Hillsborough Street. Hillsborough Street. Can't wait.
Very excited.
I love Hillsborough. I'm on Hillsborough all the time. Ms. Godwin, Hillsborough Street update, please.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for your feedback so far. So moving into Hillsborough Street and the assessment of Phase 1 of this corridor. So just a light agenda, going to be talking a little bit of background on this original streetscape project, talk about some short-term options, but also feed into some long-term considerations for the commission. So a little bit of background for you. The Hillsborough Street Streetscape project feasibility study and conceptual plans were complete in 2001. Phase 1 of this project is what we're going to be focusing on for the next few slides, which is between Gardner and Oberlin Road. Talking more holistically about the Hillsborough Street project, this added 5 roundabouts that replaced vehicular traffic signals. It also widened sidewalks and added bike lanes on the corridor. So let's talk about the existing conditions out there currently. So for Phase 1, again, between Oberlin and Gardner, we have our travel lanes separated by the median that you cannot see due to the menu box again. But on either side of those travel lanes, we have an east and west bike lane striped in the current condition. Additionally, the bike lanes are directly adjacent to parking, and just wanted to note that there is no buffer in between the bike lanes and parking at this time. So moving into some short-term options for Phase 1. Option A really speaks to converting that travel lane into a shared space. We do have limited road width in this section of Hillsborough Street due to the median. And so this really just kind of gives you an idea about what could be if we were to change any of the existing striping. Option B restripes the condition as was originally planned. So kind of some of the trade-offs, and I didn't mention this in the last slide here, but moving the cars and cyclists into the shared space really removes that door zone that we have heard some feedback on is, a tense situation for both cyclists and drivers as they're navigating that space together. And then kind of how that compares to option B, the dedicated space allows for cyclists to move along the corridor, in times of congestion when cars are backed up, but also presents the door zone as a possibility. So just wanted to highlight that caveat.
What's the difference between option B and what's existing?
There is no difference.
Okay, gotcha.
So these are very short-term, quick applications that we could achieve.
Because the lanes are disappearing.
Yes, that's correct.
Have disappeared.
Yeah, they're gone.
So option B is just,
Yeah.
option B is putting the strike back.
Yes, and apologies for not clarifying that.
Edwin, do we have the dimensions by chance for the lanes, the bike and vehicular lanes? Do you know how wide they are?
So the bike lanes I know are 4 feet. Those parking lanes are 7. I believe those travel lanes are 10 to 11. I think they're closer to 10.
Okay, thank you.
So I'm showing my age here, so we're going back in time. So 2010, just wanted to kind of set the stage here. So Hillsborough Street, this phase was really setting, the trend on bike infrastructure. So I think we've gained a lot of lessons learned over the last decade. And, these are the things that we're going back and looking at and seeing. Again, you don't have buffers. The goal of Hillsborough Street back then, slow traffic down, increase pedestrian safety, walkability with the university and the businesses. And that accomplished a lot of that through that. But again, I think the bike infrastructure was one we didn't know at the time, what was best practices at that time. And again, so you got a kind of a small footprint there to Commissioner Alley's comment or question about the lane width. So you don't have a lot to work with out there as far as pavement. And so that's just something that the commission needs to keep in mind as you look at this is, do we go back with in-kind, with what we've done, what's on the ground, or do we look at basically bike in the street lane with the traffic? So again, some things I've heard is, hey, Hillsborough Street's fairly level, so a cyclist could basically continue the speeds of a vehicle. Some would say, hey, having your own dedicated lane, you're able to kind of move past any kind of conflict or turning vehicle. So again, just some tough decisions that the commission will have to think about as this gets, I don't want to spoil your thunder here, but I think you're going to maybe recommend this. But again, I think great lessons learned, again, kind of 12 years later on where we are. So again, I was around here at this time, so again, this is just one that I know Commissioner Thomas, you brought up. And again, I think to your comment, Chairman Neptune, we want to make things better. Yeah. As we continue to learn from, past mistakes. And I wouldn't say mistakes, again, it's what the organization knew at the time. How can we make these facilities better and more usable for the community out here? So anyway, just some thoughts to think about.
Thank you. Just briefly, is there an option C? We've seen 2 options.
These are the only 2 options for the short term. I do have some long-term considerations for the whole corridor in a couple of slides.
So we're not done with the presentation.
We are not.
Okay, thank you. If we could continue with the presentation.
Sure.
Thank you.
So long-term considerations, and again, these are things along the whole corridor that we just want the commission to be thinking about as we're having this discussion about phase 1. So the downtown mobility and transportation operations study RFQ is currently out on the street. It was posted last week. We'll be receiving applications or proposals for that RFQ in the next month. But really, the study is working to balance the needs between bikes, pedestrians, micromobility vehicles, and cars throughout our downtown core. And really, the goal is to establish key networks within our downtown, which likely Hillsborough Street would be identified from that study as a key east-west corridor. So just something to think about there. Additionally, there's a lot of development activity on the section of Hillsborough Street downtown between West and Dawson. So something that we're considering as a part of kind of tacking onto that development is a standalone project in our priority project list that would connect the section of Hillsborough between West and Glenwood into that development and the existing facility west of Glenwood Avenue. And I'll show you some cross sections in the next couple of slides that show you what that will look like. And then lastly, just another kind of big picture item for you. We are pursuing within our Bike and Ped group a NCDOT grant that is currently on the streets, and it's being managed by their IMD division, Integrated Mobility Division. And so really this grant opportunity is a chance for municipalities to either update or create new bike and pedestrian plans. And so we're taking a more holistic look at both of these plans and seeking, opportunities for funding to update those plans. So just wanted to put those few thoughts out there for your consideration as well. So in reference to the development activity, this is what will be to come on the 300 block of Hillsborough Street. Many of you are probably familiar with the Circular Hotel on 300 block, the old Holiday Inn. And so with this project, when it goes to construction, the westbound side of Hillsborough, the northbound side, but westbound in direction bike lane will be improved to a behind the curb and buffered facility. So that is what that section between Dawson and West Street will look like.
As in like complete street, Barbara, behind the curb, when you say that? Above?
It's a raised behind the curb buffered bike lane, separately buffered from the pedestrians as well.
Do you know, is the curb moving outward, or is this happening in the space that was, there's a 14 or 16 foot required sidewalk?
I believe the curb will be moving outward.
Okay, moving into the road. Okay. That's a big change. Okay, great. That's an expensive change. Moving curbs.
This is pretty big right here.
Okay.
Ms. Clark?
Will that extend to west, but then there's construction happening between west and where Hillsborough and merges with Eaton? So will you just be dumped?
So this is that section on the 400 block in our next slide here. So this condition is a staff's proposal to that developer to include as part of the finalized pavement marking plans. This is a buffered, parking protected bike facility. I know there's probably some questions around why wasn't this one able to be moved behind the curb as well. TC 321 text change was not adopted at this time when this development came through. So this is the next best facility that we would be able to get from this project.
Would that be buffered?
Yes, parking protected and buffered.
So it's similar to West Street?
Yes.
Councilmember Harrison?
I was just curious, for this parking protected bike lane, is that also an option for Hillsborough Street?
So
Bump outs.
there's some challenges there with the current road width that we have available without moving the curb. So anytime we would have to move the curb, that drives the price way up, and it would essentially be a challenge to implement this time.
Parking is also kind of cut in.
Right.
Yeah, you'd be
Ped bump outs.
you'd be moving
You'd be redoing the
some
entire
significant infrastructure, storm drain, disruption a bit. I mean, so that would be a major undertaking, doing something like this right here on Hillsborough Street there, along the university.
Thank you. Ms. Godwin? Oh.
That concludes my presentation.
Wow.
Additionally, I didn't include this in my slide, but staff is recommending this item to go into Planning Committee for March, which is next week. I know that doubles the agenda, but any considerations around Hillsborough Street and any changes that would have to be made have to be coordinated with the university from a timing standpoint. Mm-hmm. And so in terms of getting the necessary feedback on this project, we were hoping to get some feedback from the commission this month.
Commissioner Tong?
Yes, we can look at this in March.
Deeply appreciate you and the rest of our planning committee and their attention to the Hillsborough corridor. Any further comment from the commission? Is that Gellenbeck?
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I have a question actually. At last month's BPAC meeting, we talked about lower speed limits at 20 miles per hour. And at that time, I remember the engineering staff saying that that wasn't available here in the city of Raleigh to lower this traffic speed to 20 miles per hour. So I brought that up with Sean Driscoll and asked if he saw that if that's someplace he's read in writing, because I know that there are other cities in North Carolina that do lower the traffic speeds to 20 miles per hour, and that includes NCDOT roads that have lowered their traffic speed. So is that a potential for Hillsborough Street if we are going to have the travel lane be shared to lower the travel speed to 20 miles per hour so that when drivers enter this section of roadway, they understand that they are entered into a high pedestrian active travel concourse? So, yeah, question is it written somewhere that prevents Raleigh from lowering traffic speeds to 20 miles per hour?
So I'm not going to give you 100%, but I'm pretty confident that it's in our city ordinance.
Okay.
But let us look that up and see
Okay.
on that to see if it can. But I think it's spelled out in our city ordinance.
All right. That'd be great to confirm it.
Ms. Sally, and then Mr. Thomas.
Along the lines of Ms. Gellenbeck's comment, I think it would be helpful to have some data for the decision making. I'm thinking about volumes, buses would be a thing I would consider when writing. I think that the Hillsborough Street bid has been using ped counters out there. Maybe there's cooperation with the city. So I don't know if we have cyclist numbers, and certainly I think you all as experienced riders have a good gut feeling about these things, but just wondering what kind of, instead of it just being a gut decision, what kind of data we could use for this decision making. The other thing I think about is I think underutilized space on the south side of the street on NC State's campus, where they have that bus lane over towards the library. I can't remember how far or how continuous that path is, but whether or not there are options for less experienced cyclists to get out of the corridor entirely. I would imagine that most of the cycle traffic there is related to NC State, but certainly not all. And similarly, parallel routes like Clark is an available cyclist route, because Ashero is not best practice, but neither is a 4-foot lane, right? So we're not making ideal decisions here. So those are my thoughts.
Well, I'd like to just expand on them. We do have Cardinal Bike Share docking stations on Hillsborough Street. So I think it's really a valuable road to transition the space into a bikeway, if you want, or pedestrian. Prioritizing that mode of travel should be, I think, the way that we approach the design, and that vehicle drivers are guests, not denying them access for using the space. However, it has to be conveyed to them that this space that they're entering is almost like a parking lot. That this is a space where the priority has been placed on this mode of transportation. And I can't...
Plaza is like that. You table up into it, it makes you slow down.
I just think that it's important. Especially when we have young adults, the freshmen that are arriving to NC State campus have to live on campus, and they're not and they're discouraged to bring cars. Right? So they come from across the state, and primarily they arrive without a vehicle for transportation.
Yeah.
At least I know that was my experience when my kids went off to college here in North Carolina. So I think that Hillsborough Street is such a commodity to raise Raleigh in this transition as we change our behavior. Because in order for us to reach Vision Zero, we really have to do that. Changing our behavior towards each other where we're using this public road space.
Thank you, Ms. Gellenbeck. Mr. Thomas?
Thank you. I've been working at NC State and Nelson Hall right there on Hillsborough Street in Dan Allen for the past 15 years. And I've seen this transformation of Hillsborough Street, and it's been absolutely incredible. It may be the most transformational change we've seen in the last decade in the entire city. I'm concerned about what was presented as option A, reverting to Sharrows. I think about using that street myself in that condition, thinking about it as a father and a husband. Would my son, would my wife feel comfortable doing that? And the answer is simply no. And would I be comfortable with them riding in that condition? No, I would not. I routinely see families riding in the current lanes, mothers riding bikes, children following behind. And I feel like I know that option B, just simply restriping, doesn't solve the dooring issue and is not ideal. But I also respect that it's hard to create space where there isn't any. I get that. But I think from my perspective, the best option going forward is to restripe the existing lanes as quickly as we can to signal what that space is for, not just for the cyclists, but for the drivers who enter parking spaces, who leave parking spaces. Do we need to change their behavior? Yes, absolutely. But that's a longer-term process, I think. And so I'm strongly advocating that we move forward with option B as recognizing it's not the ideal solution. It's what we knew at the time and what we put in place, but to remove those lanes entirely and go to a Sharrows situation, I feel like could be received very, very reasonably by the cycling community as simply the city throwing up their hands like we don't know what to do. Let's go back, let's take a step backwards here, and I don't think that's the right approach. So those are my feelings on the short-term solution.
Well, Mr. Thomas, as someone who has heard year after year, your commitment to having the Hillsborough corridor addressed in terms of this, the bike lanes and the sort of gradual diminishment of the actual existing lanes. I certainly appreciate hearing your specific thoughts about this, and I imagine staff appreciates it as well. I wonder if there could be this sort of combo of repainting the lanes as soon as possible, which again I know Planning Committee will get into more detail on this, but I wonder if it's a potential combination of repainting the lanes coupled with just maybe more signage, along that corridor. I certainly appreciate it every time I see it, whether it's, the pedestrian signage or, bikes, please share the bike lane. It's big, it's yellow, it's in your face. I wonder if the combo could be considered for the corridor in the short term. Thank you,
yes.
Mr. Thomas. Ms. Alley?
One further comment. It would be useful to know what the vehicular lane width is. I remember when this street was redesigned, it was under NCDOT's control, and so the lane width decision was theirs to make. And I believe now that this is city-controlled facility, which means that perhaps there is an opportunity in our restriping to take a little bit of vehicular space, and maybe that would lessen the dooring pressure because the bike lane would be wider. We will certainly not get to a perfect solution, but I don't know, maybe there's a third way in here.
Thank you.
We can, excuse me, sorry.
I'd just like to add that I was almost doored in this space, and I was almost hit by a delivery truck mirror in that space. And so I stand on the opposite of not redoing what we've already done.
Ms. Godwin?
I was just going to comment on Commissioner Alley's feedback and say that we will confirm the lane widths and see if there's any room to expand.
Thank you. Any further comment from the commission? Mr. Caruso?
Excuse me. Is there anything that would prevent us from installing speed cushions or something to that effect on Hillsborough? The reason, I guess, why I'm thinking that is that I don't think either option is good, or not. Well, I should say great. I hear the comments and concerns about removing the bike lane, and I agree with those. But I also personally would rather take the lane than ride in the current or what used to be bike lane. So, whether or not there was a bike lane painted, I would ride in traffic personally. So I feel like an underlying problem is that even though, as Mr. Callum said, the streetscape is vastly improved over what it was. Traffic still, if it's free flowing, still does move quickly through there to a degree where people that aren't confident cyclists won't ride in the street. And I feel like if we can get the average speed down to a more human scale, then more people will, ride at all, and more people will feel comfortable riding in the lane. Again, like if you want to ride in the bike lane, then go for it. But they can ride in the full traffic lane if speeds are lower. So I'm sure it will cost a little extra money versus just striping, but I think it would definitely be helpful to look at adding speed cushions if possible. I know that kind of throws a wrench in the high transit activity on the street, but
if I may, Mr. Caruso, that sounds like something that staff in conversation with Planning Committee can further explore in their deep dive next week. Is that fair to say, Ms. Godwin, Mr. Cowan? Sure.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Tong?
I know pre-COVID we had a bike ped counter on Hillsborough Street. Is it possible to get some data from that before the meeting next week?
Yes, we can look into that.
Yes, I just want to go on the record. So I talked to Jeff Morrison on Friday afternoon. He's the president and CEO of the Hillsborough Street Community Service Corporation. So Jeff and I have got a great relationship here, and so he's very supportive. The one thing he shared with me is if it gets towards a lot of disruption, then there's going to be concerns from the business owners. So he was, hey, Paul, really, I think either back in kind like it was or in the street, I don't think business owners, but again, to Barbara's comment, once we get feedback from the planning committee, then we'll just reach out with our partners at NC State and the Hillsborough Street Service Corporation and bring them on board there.
And again, it's also worth acknowledging, in addition to that observation, we're talking short-term versus long-term.
Sure.
Right? So there may, again, have to be some patience exerted as we try to navigate, this challenging dynamic, right? With at least a more immediate solution that people have been calling for years, while we work toward a long-term, more permanent solution. Mr. Thomas.
Yes. I am all for having the speed limit reduced to 20, reducing traffic speed by rule and by practice, sort of on the ground, things that actually change people's behavior. I'm all for that, but as you noted, I've been bringing this up since I joined the commission 2+ years ago, and there's been no movement on this, and so I think it's a disservice to the current cycling community that uses the Hillsborough Street lanes to continue to allow them to sort of exist. They're in long stretches, they are completely absent. And one of the articles that Ms. Arrowsmith shared with us talked about Hillsborough Street being one of the most dangerous for Raleigh cyclists. Well, that's largely because that's where Raleigh cyclists are concentrated. I-40 would be much more dangerous for cyclists, but no one's cycling on I-40. So, this is, I think, a short-term solution that I'm looking for to get the lanes redone. I support reducing the speed limit through there or reducing actual speeds through there as best we can, but I recognize that's a longer-term undertaking.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Any further comment from the commission? Mr. Caruso?
I just had a quick question about timeline on the kind of downtown section. So we have these kind of two blocks that were mentioned as far as the Holiday Inn and 400H. Is the rest of the downtown Hillsborough section going to be part of the downtown study, or what is the thought around the additional sections? additional blocks?
So I think the goal would be to, out of the downtown mobility, transportation, and operations study, get some solid recommendations from that sort of packet of information once we get to that point, and kind of from there move forward with next steps on what those key networks are, i.e. Hillsborough Street. So I would say to your question, yes, there are, things in the works to help address that, but they are not part of a short-term type option. Does that answer your question?
Yeah. And the NCDOT grant, is that only a planning grant, or are there some type of potential capital funds available from that?
That is a planning grant.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Caruso, Ms. Godwin. Hearing no further comment from the commission on this particular topic, I believe we are good to proceed. Ms. Godwin and Mr. Callum, thank you both for your work on the Hillsborough Street corridor. Looking forward to the work of our planning committee as they do a further deep dive into the various issues that were discussed tonight. As it happens, just a quick note with regard to the time, it's 7:21. We are tracking toward wrapping up here. Not too long from now, we're going to transition to reports. We'll kick things off with the chair's report. To keep it brief, we'll just kind of run through some items here from the last month. I had the pleasure and the privilege of joining Mr. Callum and Mr. Ritchie, who I believe is off at a conference this evening out of state. But I had the privilege of joining our team in interviews for our next bike and pedestrian manager for the city of Raleigh. Very exciting. We've got some fine candidates. Looking forward to the final decision making on behalf of our transportation staff. Following that, I've had the pleasure of meeting with the Downtown Raleigh Alliance transportation planner, Mary Sell. Some of you might recognize that name, Mary Sell. I had a good catch up with her. Joined Councilmember Harrison and others associated with the District D Neighborhood Alliance last Saturday morning for an update from Sean Driscoll on the Vision Zero program. And in fact, I was reminded earlier this evening, and part of that conversation that particular morning was, in fact, the sort of balance of trying to reduce traffic related violence with regard to pedestrians and cyclists, trying to reduce that through changes to infrastructure, while also proactively designing for the type of transportation that we'd like to see. So really good conversations, I thought, took place that day. Lots of good information shared with the community, and it was followed by a bike ride that Councilmember Harrison and Oaks and Spokes organized, and I participated in a bit until I had to scoop off back to District C for some various commitments. Moving forward, this also reminds me, before I continue, the Cardinal Bike Share team, Bewegan, they were out there with a number of bikes that people had a chance to use, and this is actually an opportunity to acknowledge a bit of a concern that I wanted to express as far as, I would say, over the last number of weeks, so not just a few days, but I would say the last few weeks, I have personally noticed this, let's say, persistent issue with the Cardinal bikes at multiple stations being, let's say, just out of service altogether. And I'm not talking like one or two, I'm talking multiple bikes at multiple stations, and this is over multiple weeks. Now, I think it'd be one thing if I notice this, once or twice, but I'm finding this persistently. You hear what I'm saying? And so I'm talking out of service, dead batteries, just like altogether not usable. And I'd appreciate if staff could take a moment, if they could find an opportunity to kind of connect with the Bewegan team. I know we've gone through some staffing changes and transitions with Bewegan, And so, I would just love an update on kind of where we are in the maintenance of the facility, because I know that, again, we were just celebrating the Cardinal Bike Share program this past Saturday. And in fact, today, as another one of my updates, I was invited to join a 7:30 a.m. breakfast meeting, which is unheard of in my book. But you know what? We made it a priority because it was with the International Trails Summit. These very talented folks are considering Raleigh, North Carolina as a host city for their 2025 International Trails Summit. So our Greater Raleigh Convention Visitors Bureau kindly invited me to a 7:30 a.m. breakfast meeting. And a part of that topic of conversation was our bike share program. And, I'm over here extolling the virtues. And, of course, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, I got some questions about what we're doing with the bike share. So I think it's been heard. I won't, belabor the issue. But I do look forward to hearing an update on that front. Thank you. Moving forward, also had the pleasure and the privilege of meeting with Planning Commissioner Dwight Otwell. Some of you might remember that name. We had a good conversation about bike facilities and planning and development here in the city of Raleigh. And then last but not least, last Friday, this was a real privilege. I had the opportunity to attend a dinner in Durham, North Carolina, our fair friends in the Bull City, with the East Coast Greenway Alliance. It was a partnership dinner. The Director of Transportation from Durham, the city of Durham, was in attendance, in addition to others from across the country who've been advancing improvements in bike facilities, greenway trails across the country for the last 30 years or so. And so that was a real privilege to be a part of that conversation with regard to the work. And I think that's what was, in fact, top of mind for me this evening as I made the comment about, the nature of what we do in terms of the advocacy and ultimately the implementation of trying to make these improvements and these investments in our public infrastructure, and how, it does take extraordinary patience from time to time as we navigate, the city, the county, the state, and the reality that we're sharing space with hundreds of thousands of people. But God bless America. Lord knows we are doing it. We're committed to it, and I'm grateful for your work and all of it. I am done with the chair's report. Up next, Planning Committee.
At our February meeting, we met with Ann Conlon with the city to discuss the Midtown Multimodal Bridge. We expressed some disappointment that it's not a bike ped only bridge, but we understand that would require modifying the walkable Midtown plan. We did support alternative B initially, and that seemed to be what most of the public preferred from the survey. And looking forward to discuss Hillsborough Street next week.
Very nice. Thank you, Commissioner Tong. Policy Committee?
So the Policy Committee met last month and started talking about the Vision Zero action plan and kind of that whole process. And we started to go through kind of making a more formalized list of kind of specific items that the policy committee and then eventually the entire BPAC would like to request be included in the final in the report as kind of topic areas. I've kind of started to put that together, but unfortunately I haven't had enough time to kind of fully flesh out the entire document. So I'll work on that soon and send it out to everybody. So look to that, and I will ask for approval next month.
Thank you, Mr. Caruso. Outreach had no pending items, so no formal report, although I would like to share that Mr. Thomas and Ms. Gellenbeck were both spotted at the Saturday morning event in District D with the bike ride, and just deeply appreciate seeing y'all out and about engaging our community. Mr. Thomas?
Yeah, I just would add that I also had a conversation with Jeff Murison, the CEO of Hillsborough Street Community Service Corporation, I think that's what it is. And he and I have traded emails as well, so it was good to have an in-person conversation with him on the topic of Hillsborough Street bike lanes.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Commissioner Stern was unable to be with us this evening due to a prior, I think, work-related commitment, but I believe that Commissioner Gellenbeck is prepared to share a brief update on the ad hoc street sweeper or bike lane sweeper.
Yeah, exactly. And what I'm going to share is that we've identified some bike lanes that will be a part of the pilot. We focused on bike lanes that are buffered. And so there are two sweepers. One is dedicated to downtown, so the roads, that was pretty easy for us to identify. The north-south connector, which is West Street, Harrington Street. Morgan Street has a section of protected bike lanes that's maintained by the city. Sections of it is maintained by the state. So we will really using this pilot for city-maintained streets. And we have one, we've identified Lineberry Drive, which I believe is in West Raleigh, is that correct?
Southwest, yeah.
Southwest, thanks. And we identified Crabtree Boulevard, which is northeast, as you might say, right, kind of? And both of these, really, all of these actually presented challenges, either it be nature's debris or man-made debris that's in these lanes. And because they're buffered, really are kept in a space. And so weaving in and out of garbage or nature's debris, we felt like that would be good. Barbara concurred that that was just the right amount of lanes for the pilot. And Barbara, can you add how long that pilot's going to last? Because it's...
We don't have a confirmed time, but thinking somewhere in the realm of 6 months or so, just depending on the amount of data that we're able to get in that time.
Yes, so this is going to be fast, which is really great. In addition to the buffered protected lanes, we also chose 3 buffered lanes. One on Whitaker Mill Road, which does have a lot of debris, natural debris in it. Gorman Street, which we felt was important for student travel. And then the other is Hardymont, which is a lane that that's above North Hills, and I think a lane that it's not protected. There's lots of challenges to it, and we'll leave it at that.
Well, thank you for that update on behalf of our Bike Lane Sweeper Ad Hoc Committee, Ms. Gallenbeck. Up next, we have staff reports.
So I have several report items for you tonight, so bear with me. The first one I spoke to during my presentation on Hillsborough Street in reference to the IMD planning grant opportunity. So you'll notice on the last page of your agenda packet, staff has drafted a letter of support from the perspective of the commission. So if you'll recall, when Sean Driscoll came and presented on the Safe Streets for All grant, he proposed a similar letter in support of that grant opportunity. So really what we're asking for tonight from this letter is BPAC's support in the content, and Mr. Neptune as chair, your signature that expresses that affirmed support. And of course, take the time to review it, and if we could get some feedback, I would say either by end of this week or early next week, that would be most ideal.
In order for the chair of the commission to just sign off on this, we don't necessarily need to take a vote, do we, Ms. Godwin? Because I know we don't have quorum tonight, so.
We do not have quorum, correct. I would say, Mr. Callum, do you have any thoughts on that?
We wouldn't need a vote. I'd just, again, collect your thoughts, any changes or whatever, you can just get with Barbara on that, and then we can take that forward.
Thank you. I just wanted to confirm, because
Good question.
certainly my, let's say, gut level response is to endorse this letter of support. But I will certainly invite and encourage all the members of the commission that are present, and of course we'll reach out to those who cannot be with us to share their thoughts, their feedback, with Ms. Godwin, with myself, between now and the end of the week, and hopefully we can, move forward accordingly. Any initial thoughts, Mr. Caruso?
Yeah, I mean, can you just give us a brief context of what this grant is and how much money we're talking about, and just kind of, what the grant is?
So the grant is essentially an opportunity for municipalities across the state to either create a bicycle or pedestrian plan or to update their existing plans. So with our current pedestrian plan, we would be eligible for a complete redrawing and redesigning of the comprehensive pedestrian plan, whereas our bike plan is eligible for a plan update. So the match requirement that Raleigh is designated based on the size of the population is a 50% match. So the state would supplement half of the cost and the city would supplement the other half of the cost. And so if we were to pursue a completely new pedestrian plan, for example, that would probably amount to up to $200,000 to $300,000.
And Ms. Godwin, just a point of clarification, this is a grant that's being administered by the NC DOT Integrated Mobility Division, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And effectively, in brief, it would support the city's efforts to update and revise our bicycle transportation plan and our pedestrian plan.
Yes, and in terms of strategy for our application, we are still kind of confirming the approach that we would like to take. And so with this letter, that would help us when we get to that point of submitting the application materials.
Thank you. Ms. Alley?
Just a brief point. I'm completely in favor of chasing this and really excited about the prospect specifically for the pedestrian plan, which has not been on our radar. It'll be interesting to think about how to combine these efforts specifically around engagement and the Vision Zero plan. You know, we're talking about engaging, Vision Zero is also about vehicular injury and death. But, we would be engaging the same and similar communities over and over again. So I think there's some real opportunity for synergy there if done correctly, but also an opportunity for some planning fatigue, which doesn't really benefit anybody. So it'd be interesting to think about how we might be able to bundle those efforts in a way, which should be easy since there's like 3 staff people working on all 3 of them. So God bless you, Barbara.
Agreed, Ms. Alley. Thank you. Any further comment from the commission? Hearing none, I believe Ms. Godwin has further updates to share.
I do. So additionally, I've included a list of events for Bike Month this year. You might notice that our event list is a little lighter than it has been in the past. Mason Chambly over in our Commute Smart group in the Transit Division and I have been collaborating on this effort this year. We're really hoping that our partners in the community are going to be able to help supplement where we can't in terms of quantity of events. However, quality of events being put on by the city is certainly still there. And so I would encourage you, if you're aware of any other Bike Month related activities going on through your friends and partners and whoever it may be in the community, let us know. We can add those events to our list on our website in the form of a calendar. And so excited to have Bike Month coming up very soon.
Well, and I believe, Ms. Godwin, that the commission joined you in your excitement about the upcoming Bike Month. I think worth just acknowledging is that our friends and partners with the advocacy group Oaks and Spokes recently has hired its first ever full-time executive director. And I suspect that they will be looking forward to working with the city and other partners in advancing a handful of additional Bike Month activities. But I also happen to know that the Oaks and Spokes board will be getting together for a board retreat to do a further deep dive into their activities in not only the next few months ahead, but really the next few years ahead. So I suspect that the Sunday board retreat with Oaks and Spokes, which really is open to the public and others could join if there's interest, I imagine they'll have some good ideas from that to share to support and to further amplify Bike Month in the city of Raleigh. So, but bottom line is deeply appreciate the work that's been done to get this off the ground, given the constraints on the capacity of our transportation staff. So, thank you.
And a couple of more things, I'm sorry. Mr. Tong, you had reached out to me inquiring about the city's project over on Tarboro Road. So this was a corridor that was identified as part of our station area planning with New Bern BRT, and we are in the very early stages of that planning process. Have done some initial engagement on that corridor with the community over at Tarboro Road Community Center, and are currently trying to scope down that project through finding out what the community's priority is. And so more to come on that. The online survey is open through March 31st. So if you have any interest in finding out more about that project, that's a great resource. Or if you know anyone on that corridor specifically that has not engaged, please encourage them to do so. And then lastly, Ms. Gellenbeck, you had asked me about the Dix to Chavis Strollway. So this project is also currently in the early planning phases. We did some initial outreach and engagement efforts back in the fall with the community over at Chavis Park to try to understand priorities for the corridor, priorities around routes for the corridor specifically. And so honing in on that feedback, we're still kind of weighing the feasibility of both Lenore Street and South Street. And so at this time, we are working to get the land surveyed so that we have a better understanding of what the feasibility is in terms of design and construction for that project. And we'll be identifying a consultant at a later phase for help with the design. So more to come on that as well.
Do you have a time frame for the scope for the work as you go, like when you had the timeline showed up for the other project, Kaplan?
In terms of moving through the design or all the way through construction, which of those, or both?
Both.
Okay.
I'm just trying to gain a better sense of how this project is scheduled, so I don't have to come back and revisit what's going on.
Sure. So we'll really know more after we're able to survey and go through the initial round of feedback with a future consultant in terms of timing. We just aren't quite sure what the scope of that project is going to entail, so it's a little challenging to identify the timeline at this point, but can definitely follow up, and we'll probably have more information around the May BPAC meeting that could help with that information.
Yeah, that's faster than I thought, so I'm pleased. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Godwin. Any further question, comment from the commission? Here, Mr. Caruso. Oh, Ms.
I
Allen?
wanted to take a moment to express my appreciation for Ms. Godwin. It occurs to me that, I mean, for all of our staff, but you have been doing an extraordinarily heavy lift with great professionalism, and I just really appreciate you. Thank you for basically doing all of the work that feeds these meetings and a lot of work that we don't even know about. You're doing great.
Thank you.
I'd like to echo that sentiment. Yes, a round of applause, especially for Ms. Godwin. Obviously, we deeply appreciate all within our, Raleigh transportation staff, but Lord knows we have been front row witnesses to the work of Ms. Godwin. And so deeply appreciate you. Thank you, Ms. Alley, for raising that up. Any further comment? Mr. Caruso.
Yeah, I just had a quick question about, I know it's outside of this specific department, but the BRT on New Bern, from last we heard, the construction was supposed to kind of start like now. And to Commissioner Alley's point, there has been quite a lot of engagement on this project with yet to be construction. And I just wanted to see if there's been any kind of updates as far as if we have a timeline for when specifically we're going to kind of start to see shovels in the ground.
So easy answer is stay tuned for tomorrow at the City Council, because David Eatman in Transit, they've got a couple presentations that they're going to be presenting to council, and part of that will be some updates on when the New Bern Avenue BRT will be starting construction. So I don't have a definitive answer for you, but I know that's probably coming out in tomorrow's presentation on that.
Okay, thank you.
Do you know, can you share what time that is?
The council meeting is at 1 tomorrow.
1 here?
Yes.
Okay, thanks.
An afternoon session. Any further comment? Oh, Mr. Thomas, real quick.
Are we at general board comments here?
Oh, well, no, we're still responding to staff reports right now.
Okay.
And hearing no further comment in response to staff reports, we will now transition to general board comments. But before we proceed with full general board comments, I do want to create a space for our liaison from the Parks Board, the chair of the Parks Board, Beverly Clark, who also oversees the Greenway Committee. If Ms. Clark, if you could come forward and maybe speak into a microphone there. And I'd also like to invite Ms. Clark to perhaps bring to the attention of the commission some concerns that she has with regard to the resurfacing of Lake Boone Trail, if I'm not mistaken. If you wouldn't mind sharing that and perhaps creating a space where we could respond.
Great.
Thank you.
Well, that's on my list. First off, I do want to ask, I hope that we can get somebody from the BPAC to be a liaison to the Greenway Committee, because there are a lot of issues that overlap and connect. And so we meet on the third Monday at 4 o'clock. So I know you all have meetings at Mondays too. So we'll have to see what we can do.
Ms. Clark, we will make sure to follow up on that item between now and next month.
That would be great. I think our next one is April 10th. So we are also working on brainstorming for our work plan for the coming year. And one of the issues related to BRT is BRT on Western Boulevard will have an impact on Rocky Branch. So we'll be looking at that planning. We'll be looking at the Greenway projects in the Parks Bond and looking at what we call missing connections in the Greenway, and that being that I think I've mentioned this before, the part where the yellow line on your Greenway map makes it look like you're on a Greenway the whole way, and instead you're really on a Raleigh street. And talking with staff about do we put green paint down? How do we make that a visual connection so that people don't get, and you all would be a great ally in that advocacy. And Ms. Alley pointed out on the issue on Kaplan Drive, the issue of bike lanes and topography. And it is my understanding that the city is going to be repaving Lake Boone Trail. And I haven't studied the bike plan to know, but I understand that there'll be a bike lane on there. And talk about hills. Lake Boone coming into where you get onto 440 is not a very safe connection. So it really raises the question, is that really the best place for a bike lane? And to demonstrate the interconnectedness of our different departments, because the bike plan is saying, let's put a bike lane here, then that triggers Greenway staff to say, oh, let's put a Greenway connection here. And so there's been a proposal to come off of Lake Boone and onto House Creek. However, if you look at what that proposal looks like, you'd come off of Lake Boone, coming down a hill, make a 90-degree turn, and then do 4 zigzags to get down to House Creek. Makes no sense. Especially when you can come down Horton Street and have there's actually parking on Horton Street, and there's Horton Street. There's a connection onto the Greenway there, and there's Glen Eden. So it's one of the issues we've raised, but it really integrates with the issues that you all raise. So thank you for educating me so that I can be more holistic in my thinking. And related to that particular site, one of the things that we've talked about in our Greenway Committee is street signage for where there are greenway connections. Again, Ridge Road is a heavily used bicycle lane on both sides, but many cyclists might not know that if they turned on Horton Street, there would be a greenway connection. And we have a lot of silos that we all work in. And so if there is some way that with a process and procedure that we can request a sign that says House Creek Greenway, turn right, and that would keep people from going down Lake Boone Trail. So we are, the other project, the staff has put out an RFP for signage and on the Greenway. I think I mentioned that before. But before we go forward with some of those crazy arrow signs, they have pulled back on that because we're noticing there are a lot of errors in our signage. And so as active users, and this might be something to request from the Oaks and Spokes board as well, staff is very eager before they put new signage out to fix the existing signs. For instance, at the McDonald's and at Crabtree and Blue Ridge Road, there's one of those green signs that points you down Blue Ridge Road for the Crabtree Creek Trail and down whatever that other road is to get to House Creek. It's turned. You would, if you followed the signs, which I'm not sure many people do, but you would go in the wrong direction. So anyway, those are some of the issues, topics that we are working on, and since so many of the concerns of how our bike lanes and our bicycle pedestrian network interacts with greenways. I very much appreciate the opportunity to be at this table and to listen and learn from all that you have raised. So thank you.
Can I respond to Lake Boone Trail?
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr.
So
Tom.
last year at Planning Committee, we discussed the Lake Boone Trail project, and we knew there was going to be a greenway connection going in, but we didn't have any details. But we would be happy to take another look at it if there are additional details.
There is a preliminary thing. You know, if you're familiar with House Creek, there's sort of a ramp where they actually constructed the greenway there, but that's not wide enough, and so they would have to go broader than, I mean, if you went down that ramp, you'd end up in the creek. And especially coming off of Lake Boone Trail, you'd have a lot of speed. So it has a lot of zigzags. And so, yeah, I can ask Lisa Schiffbauer, the Greenway person, I can send you the diagram of what it looks like.
Yeah, if you have any info, send it to us and we can take another look in Planning Committee.
That would be great.
Thank you, Mr. Tong. Ms. Clark, thank you. Any further comment, observation from the commission? Hearing none, we're going to transition now to just general board comments. And just as a reminder on the time, it is 7:52. We are very close to getting out by 8 o'clock this evening. General board comments. Mr. Thomas.
Thank you. I have a couple of questions for staff. I'm wondering, is there a process for citizens to identify and maybe request updating a crosswalk that may be, the paint is faded, or is there a process for citizens to try to get something restored and, with something they use frequently?
So typically, I would just say if you could or have the individual just send me an email, or the commissioner, you can send me an email of the location, and we'll have somebody go out there and refresh it. So
Okay.
yeah, just send
great.
that to me.
Okay. And sort of a related question, if people identify a location where a no right on red might be a good idea, is that something that they can follow a similar path to get response
Sure.
on? Okay.
Yeah, we'll just work that through our traffic engineering
Okay.
group on that.
Okay.
So yeah, be happy to take those, and I'll just get them to the correct staff on that.
All right. Thank you. Great.
Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Thank you, Mr. Callum. Any further comment, general board comment from the commission?
Yes, I have some to share. Ms. Godwin, you might be interested in this one. Oaks and Spokes is participating in Marble's Kids Museum Bike Rodeo, which is Saturday, May 6th, I believe. And we're going to be installing a traffic garden for them on Hargett Street, which is being closed. I did reach out to Sean Driscoll to see if we could get some of the staff that might be interested in participating in it. Building it inside 2 hours does take this kind of staged performance, which having engineering-minded individuals really helps to elevate that input. So you guys are all welcome. It is an early morning, 7 to 9 install, but we could sure use the help for that. May 6th. It's going to be, I think, just a great repeat performance. 7 to 9 a.m. is the install. The event is from 9:30 to noon. And they're going to be using more square, so it's really going to be family friendly. Another Oaks and Spokes project with the traffic garden is on Earth Day, which I'm really excited about. So that is Saturday, April 22nd. Again, the same call for volunteers to assist putting down a traffic garden on the basketball court at Roberts Park. And the design is sustainable designs. So in addition to having just the street infrastructure, we'll also be putting in on the pattern different types of buildings, school buildings, homes, shops, a park. So it shows that 15-minute urban design. So I'm excited for that. And last comment is, I forgive me if I'm repeating myself, but I do want to put it out there. The City of Raleigh's DOT staff put in a 4-way stop on Fairview Road after it lowered the traffic speed to 25 miles per hour. And that final touch has really elevated the experience of walking, cycling, and also for driving across Fairview Road for that community because of the 4-way stop intersection that was added at Myrtle and Fairview Road. So kudos to you guys. It has raised the comfort level for all road users in that space.
Thank you, Ms. Gellenbeck. As a particular fan of Roberts Park, I especially appreciate hearing about this Earth Day event and hope we can get a number of volunteers out to support you for both that and, of course, the traffic garden over there with the Marbles Kids Museum taking place during Bike Month. So already out of the gate, the Oaks and Spokes crew coming through in partnership with some good folks in the city to amplify Bike Month even further. Any further comment, general board comment from our board, our commission? Hearing none, at 7:56, we're going to transition here to upcoming events. You've already heard of a number of good upcoming events, courtesy Commissioner Gellenbeck. I'll just share, obviously we have planning committee next week, I think on Tuesday, the 28th, if I'm not mistaken. You also have on the 26th, that's Sunday, as I mentioned earlier, the Oaks and Spokes Board Retreat. If there are folks who are interested in joining, I believe they'll be meeting at 10 a.m. at the Flower Cottage at Dix Park to discuss their strategic plan and, of course, events and programming for the rest of this year. We'll just as a sort of a fun, upbeat note, perhaps as a bit of a social for those who are interested in getting together outside of commission hours. I just happened to get wind earlier this evening that our friends at Foundation downtown celebrating their 14th anniversary. Their 14th anniversary. Downtown Raleigh, they're celebrating, as it happens, next Tuesday, right after the planning committee is getting together. The foundation is celebrating their 14th anniversary next Tuesday. I just feel like it could be a great occasion for us to get together and just have a good time together. Maybe talk about bikes, talk about lanes, talk about sidewalks.
A little bit of ancient history. The owners of Foundation Bar were two of the main advocates for the bike lanes on Hillsborough Street.
Look at this full circle moment. Look at this. So it's like it's our duty. It is our obligation as public servants to show up in support of some of our earliest advocates for bike facilities in this city. Well, with that being said, I hope to see all of you there. Foundation's 14th anniversary party. It is that night following the planning committee's meeting. Let's say any time after 6 o'clock is going to be a good time. How about that? Are there any other upcoming events? Any other upcoming events? Hearing none, seeing none, I would like to confirm that our next Bicycle Pedestrian Advisory Commission meeting will take place on Monday, April 17th at 6 p.m. I hope to see all of you there. With that said, the commission is adjourned.